Judge dismisses DOJ lawsuit demanding California voter rolls, calling it a threat to democracy, by Kevin Rector. This article is read by an automated voice. A federal judge on Thursday dismissed a U.S. Justice Department lawsuit demanding California turn over its voter rolls, calling the request unprecedented and illegal, and accusing the federal government of trying to abridge the right of many Americans to cast their ballots. U.S. District Judge David O. Carter, a Clinton appointee based in Santa Ana, questioned the Justice Department's motivations and called its lawsuit demanding voter data from California Secretary of State Shirley Weber not just an overreach into state-run elections, but a threat to American democracy. The centralization of this information by the federal government would have a chilling effect on voter registration, which would inevitably lead to decreasing voter turnout, as voters fear that their information is being used for some inappropriate or unlawful purpose, Carter wrote. This risk threatens the right to vote, which is the cornerstone of American democracy. Carter wrote that the taking of democracy does not occur in one fell swoop. It is chipped away piece by piece until there is nothing left, and that the Justice Department's lawsuit was one of these cuts that imperils all Americans. The Justice Department did not immediately respond to a request for comment late Thursday. In a video she posted to the social media platform X earlier Thursday, Assistant Attorney General Harmit Dillon, who heads the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, said she was proud of her office's efforts to clean up the voter rolls nationally, including by suing states for their data. "We are going to touch every single state and finish this project," she said. Weber, who is California's top elections official, said in a written statement that she is entrusted with ensuring that California's state election laws are enforced, including state laws that protect the privacy of California's data. "I will continue to uphold my promise to Californians to protect our democracy, and I will continue to challenge this administration's disregard for the rule of law and our right to vote," Weber said. Governor Gavin Newsom's office called the decision another example of Trump and his administration losing to California, one day after another court upheld California's congressional redistricting plan under Proposition 50, which the Trump administration also challenged in court, after state voters passed it overwhelmingly in November. The Justice Department sued Weber in September after she refused to hand over detailed voter information for some 23 million Californians, alleging that she was unlawfully preventing federal authorities from ensuring state compliance with federal voting regulations and safeguarding federal elections against fraud. It separately sued Weber's counterparts in various other states who also declined the department's requests for their state's voter rolls. The lawsuit followed an executive order by President Trump in March that purported to require voters to provide proof of citizenship and ordered states to disregard mail ballots not received by Election Day. It also followed years of allegations by Trump, made without evidence, that voting in California has been hampered by widespread fraud and voting by non-citizens, part of his broader and equally unsupported claim that the 2020 presidential election was stolen from him. In announcing the lawsuit, Attorney General Pam Bondi said in September that clean voter rolls are the foundation of free and fair elections, and that the Justice Department was going to ensure that they exist nationwide. Weber denounced the lawsuit at the time as a fishing expedition and pretext for partisan policy objectives, and as an unprecedented intrusion unsupported by law or any previous practice or policy of the U.S. Department of Justice. The Justice Department demanded a current electronic copy of California's computerized statewide voter registration list, lists of all duplicate registration records in Imperial, Los Angeles, Napa, Nevada, San Bernardino, Siskiyou, and Stanislaus counties, a list of all duplicate registrants who were removed from the statewide voter registration list, and the dates of their removals. It also demanded a list of all registrations that had been canceled due to voter deaths, an explanation for a recent decline in the recorded number of inactive voters in California, and a list of all registrations, including date of birth, driver's license number, and last four digits of social security number, that were canceled due to non-citizenship of the registrant. Carter, in his ruling Thursday, took particular issue with the Justice Department's reliance on federal civil rights laws to make its case. The Department of Justice seeks to use civil rights legislation, which was enacted for an entirely different purpose, to amass and retain an unprecedented amount of confidential voter data. This effort goes far beyond what Congress intended when it passed the underlying legislation, Carter wrote. Carter wrote that the legislation in question, including Title III of the Civil Rights Act of 1960 and the National Voter Registration Act, NVRA, of 1993, was passed to defend Black Americans' voting rights in the face of persistent voter suppression and to combat the effects of discriminatory and unfair registration laws that cheapened the right to vote. Carter found that the Justice Department provided no explanation for why unredacted voter files for millions of Californians, an unprecedented request, was necessary for the Justice Department to investigate the alleged problems it claims, and that the executive branch simply has no power to demand such data all at once without explanation. Thanks for listening to this story, brought to you by the Los Angeles Times.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we have an update regarding Oregon v. DOJ as well. Let's get into that reporting, ladies and gentlemen. That's read by an automated voice. So we will be taking a look at it as well as a listen by the Lincoln entry. So let's, without further ado, get into that reporting.
Oregon not required to give feds voter data. Judge rules. A federal judge tentatively ruled Wednesday that Oregon does not have to hand over personally identifiable data of more than 3 million Oregon voters to the federal government. In an oral ruling Wednesday evening, U.S. District Court Judge Mustafa K. Subai said he plans to dismiss the U.S. Justice Department's lawsuit against Oregon and Secretary of State Tobias Reed. K. Subai, appointed by former President Joe Biden, allowed that his final written decision may be different. Reed welcomed the ruling in a statement, calling it a big win for Oregonians' privacy and the rule of law. The federal government tried to abuse their power to force me to break my oath of office and hand over your private data, he said. I stood up to them and said no. Now, the court sided with us. Tonight, we proved, once again, we have the power to push back and win. The U.S. Department of Justice demanded last summer that Oregon and other states hand over a wide range of information, including the full name, date of birth, residential address, and driver's license number or partial social security number for every registered voter. Secretary of State Tobias Reed refused, saying that doing so would violate Oregonians' privacy rights and that the federal government has no authority to demand that data. The federal government responded by suing the state in September. U.S. District Court Judge Mustafa K. Subai, appointed by former Democratic President Joe Biden, heard arguments Wednesday over whether to dismiss the case in U.S. District Court in Eugene. I'm very cautious and doubtful that what you're asking for, which is an unredacted list, is actually going to give you the information that you need to establish a violation of two voting-related laws, K. Subai said. The lawsuit alleges the state violated the National Voter Registration Act, the Help America Vote Act, and Title III of the Civil Rights Act of 1960 by not turning over voter data. Oregon regularly provides a redacted version of its voter registration list to political parties and voter outreach groups, and the state has maintained that it will provide the redacted list to the federal government. That list includes voters' names, addresses, political parties, and birth years, but not birth dates or months, social security numbers, or driver's license numbers. The list itself is not an uncommon thing to be requested, but the National Voting Rights Act doesn't distinguish between the special list that you have to provide the federal government with this additional private information, said Thomas Castelli, an attorney for the state. It's just not in there. State leaders and the nonprofit group Our Oregon, which intervened in the case, have cited concerns that the Department of Justice wants to use voter data for immigration enforcement. It's both illegal and extremely rare for non-citizens to vote. One study of the 2016 election found just 30 incidents nationwide of suspected non-citizen voting, or 0.0001% of votes cast. Oregon last year found more than 1,800 people were registered to vote in error despite not providing documents indicating they were citizens, while at the state's Motor Vehicle Services Division, only 39 of those people voted, and several of them later established that they were citizens when they voted. The state did not pursue criminal charges against any of those voters because none knowingly broke the law, and the Secretary of State's office added guardrails to prevent similar mistakes. Brandon Lewiston, an attorney representing Our Oregon and several Oregon voters who intervened in the lawsuit, said reporting and public statements from U.S. Department of Justice officials indicated that the federal government is trying to create a national voter registration list and run it through databases held by the Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. DOJ Service, an initiative formerly led by Trump campaign donor Elon Musk. The federal government would then use that data to identify people it wants to remove from voter rolls, Lewiston said. A few days before the federal government sued Oregon, an unnamed spokesperson for the Department of Justice told Stateline that the department is sharing voter information with the Department of Homeland Security to search for non-citizens to scrub aliens from voter rolls. The federal government is suspicious of Oregon's voter rolls in part because the state succeeded in registering more eligible voters than the national average. More than 95% of U.S. citizens aged 18 or older in Oregon were registered to vote ahead of the November 2024 election, compared to 73.6% of adult citizens nationwide. When you see a state that's consistently above 90% of the citizen voting age population, it's a potential yellow flag, federal attorney James Thomas Tucker said. When the state goes above the 95% threshold, that's a red flag. Oregon was the first state in the nation to automatically register adult citizens to vote when they obtain or renew driver's licenses or state ID cards at the Motor Vehicle Services Division, and the number of registered voters rose to more than 3 million in the decade since that law took effect. The state also automatically restores voting rights to people convicted of felonies after they complete their sentences, while other states restrict voting rights in perpetuity or until someone convicted of a crime pays fines and petitions the government to have their voting rights restored. Oregon also regularly leads the nation in voter turnout, though rates have declined since automatic voter registration added more voters to the rolls. Last year's presidential election had a 75.4% turnout in Oregon, down from the 2004 peak of 86.5%, but well above the national 65.3% turnout. Oregon and Maine were the first two states the Trump administration sued on September 16th, though it has now sued at least 23 states. K. Subai's early questions of Tucker centered on differences between the Oregon lawsuit and subsequent complaints against other states. The lawsuits against Oregon and Maine allege the states violated the National Voter Registration Act, the Help America Vote Act, and Title III of the Civil Rights Act of 1960 by not turning over voter data. More recent lawsuits, including two filed against Arizona and Connecticut last week, rely only on the Civil Rights Act, the That law requires all election officers to maintain, for 22 months after a federal election, all records, including voter registrations, for everyone who voted in that election and make those documents available for the U.S. Attorney General to inspect and copy. There was certainly a realization within the department that we were making our jobs more difficult than we needed to make them, Tucker said. But K-Subai was skeptical that the Civil Rights Act, which passed as part of a series of laws targeting discrimination including disenfranchisement of black voters, was relevant to the federal government's argument. I can appreciate that the context in which the Civil Rights Act was promulgated was because of the historical exclusion of people on the basis of race from voting, he said. And so I think exclusion was the primary consideration, not over-inclusion. https://oregoncapitalchronicle.com/2026/01/14/ federal judge hears arguments over Trump demands for Oregon voter data / Oregon Capital Chronicle is part of State's Newsroom, a network of news bureaus supported by grants and a coalition of donors as a 501c3 public charity. Oregon Capital Chronicle maintains editorial independence. Contact editor Lynn Terry for questions. info@oregoncapitalchronicle.com.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into our next reporting by The Hill, read to us by an automated voice. So we will be taking a look, a read, as well as a listen. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into it. Before we begin, please like, comment, share, subscribe, as well as enjoy if you've enjoyed the reporting so far this evening.
U.S. Embassy in Qatar urging increased caution amid Trump rhetoric on Iran. By Ryan Mancini. The U.S. Embassy in Qatar advised personnel Wednesday to exercise increased caution as President Trump warns of military action in Iran amid rising tensions between both countries and the suppression of anti-government protesters. The embassy also advised personnel to limit any non-essential travel to Al Udeid Air Base. Officials said in a post on social platform 10, "We recommend U.S. citizens in Qatar do the same," embassy officials stated. The U.S. mission to Qatar continues to monitor the situation. Personnel at Al Udeid Air Base were advised to leave by Wednesday night as a precautionary measure. A U.S. official told the Associated Press. The official did not offer specifics about the decision, but cited operational security concerns. On Thursday, the Trump administration announced new sanctions against the architects of the Iranian regime's brutal crackdown on peaceful demonstrators and the shadow banking networks accused of helping wealthy Iranians divert funds generated by the country's natural resources. The United States stands firmly behind the Iranian people in their call for freedom and justice. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent wrote in a post on 10. At the direction of President Trump, the Treasury Department is sanctioning key Iranian leaders involved in the brutal crackdown against the Iranian people. The sanctions will hit several key Iranian commanders and Supreme National Security Council Secretary Ali Larijani. The administration accused him of being one of the first Iranian leaders to call for violence against anti-government demonstrators. Trump said Wednesday that sources on the other side told him that Iran has stopped carrying out executions amid the protests. However, he did not rule out U.S. military action should the executions continue. "We do not want to see what is happening in Iran happen," Trump told reporters in the Oval Office prior to a bill signing. "And you know, if they want to have protests, that is one thing. When they start killing thousands of people, and now you're telling me about hanging, we will see how that works out for them. It is not going to work out good." Iranian officials indicated that fast trials and executions were still planned, the AP reported. And Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, said the regime was still executing Iranian citizens. Contradicting the president, "Every indication that I have seen says that the Iranian regime's killing of protesters is still very much in full swing." Graham posted Wednesday on 10. "The death toll is mounting by the hour, hoping that help is on the way." The U.S.-based human rights activist news agency reported Wednesday that at least 2,600 people have been killed amid the protests. This includes 13 children, 14 non-protesting civilians, and 153 members of the security forces and government supporters. More than 18,000 people have been arrested.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for that legal breaking reporting. Let's get into our second to last but not least reporting by The Hill, read to us by an automated voice again. So we will be taking a look, a read, as well as a listen, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, before we begin and continue with our reportings, please like, comment, share, subscribe, as well as enjoy for more that you need to know about on the side of politics.
Trump announces Gaza Board of Peace has been formed. By Ryan Mancini. President Trump on Thursday announced that the Board of Peace to oversee Gaza has been formed, months after Israel and Hamas reached a fragile ceasefire following 2 years of conflict. "It is my great honor to announce that the Board of Peace has been formed," Trump posted on Truth Social. "The members of the board will be announced shortly. But I can say with certainty that it is the greatest and most prestigious board ever assembled at any time. Any place." Almost an hour and a half later, Trump announced that we have officially entered the next phase of Gaza's 20-point peace plan. Citing Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, "As chairman of the Board of Peace, I am backing a newly appointed Palestinian technocratic government, the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, supported by the board's high representative to govern Gaza during its transition." He wrote on Truth Social, "These Palestinian leaders are unwaveringly committed to a peaceful future." The president said that with Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar's support, the U.S. will secure a comprehensive demilitarization agreement with Hamas, including the surrender of all weapons and the dismantling of every tunnel. Hamas must immediately honor its commitments, including the return of the final body to Israel, and proceed without delay to full demilitarization, Trump continued. "As I've said before, they can do this the easy way or the hard way. The people of Gaza have suffered long enough. The time is now, peace through strength." The president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who worked with Witkoff as a special advisor on the Middle East, praised the news. "Today marks a historic new beginning in the Middle East," Kushner wrote on the social platform X. Witkoff announced the news of the second phase on Wednesday, moving from ceasefire to demilitarization, technocratic governance. In Reconstruction, he wrote on X. He added that Hamas is expected to fully comply with its obligations, including the immediate return of the final deceased hostage. Failure to do so will bring serious consequences, Witkoff said. Despite the ceasefire, Israel carried out strikes that killed 9 in Gaza on Thursday. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called Witkoff's announcement largely symbolic and called the governing committee of Palestinians announced as part of the second phase as a declarative move. Hamas has reasserted its control over the territory since the ceasefire began. On Sunday, Hamas officials said they will dissolve their government in Gaza once a Palestinian technocratic leadership committee takes over. The Board of Peace is expected to deploy an international security force when Hamas disarms its militants and Israel draws back its military from the Gaza Strip. According to the 20-point peace plan, the board is point 9. The plan also rejects any long-term Israeli occupation of the Gaza Strip and says Israel will not annex any territory. The plan states that if the Palestinian Authority meets reform conditions, it would create a path to Palestinian statehood. The final point is that the U.S. will facilitate a dialogue between Israel and Gaza.
Ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, let's get into our next reporting by the Democracy Docket. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, please like, comment, share, subscribe, as well as enjoy. For more local breaking news that you need to know about and more on the side of politics, the article title is titled Colorado Secretary of State urges Governor not to pardon Tina Peters, which majority of you hopefully will remember. Tina Peters was the Mesa County election clerk in 2020 that denied Trump's rightful loss to Joe Biden, who was sentenced to, I think it was 9 years or something like that. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, the article reads, Colorado Secretary of State Gina Griswold, a Democrat, is urging Governor Jared Polis, Democrat, not to pardon Tina Peters amid an intense pressure campaign led by President Donald Trump to free the convicted election denier. Peters, a former GOP county clerk, is serving a 9-year state prison sentence for her role in a 2021 voting system breach. Tina Peters granted unauthorized access to voting equipment and placed the security of Mesa County's elections at risk, unquote, Griswold said in an interview with the Democracy Docket. Quote, her actions have been used to spread countless conspiracy theories and incite countless threats against election officials here. Pardon me, ladies and gentlemen, election officials here in Colorado and across the country. She was found guilty by a jury of her peers in a conservative county where she's from, and she is one of the only people in the entire country who is still facing accountability for attacking American elections. Unquote. On Tuesday, Griswold, along with 2 Republican leaders of the Colorado County Clerks Association, sent a letter to Polis asking him to not pardon or commute Peters' sentence, warning the governor that a pardon could further embolden far-right election deniers, putting election workers and future elections at risk. Polis, who is term limited from running for re-election this year, recently signaled possible clemency for Peters after relentless pressure that is illegal, ladies and gentlemen, and retribution against Colorado from Trump. Trump himself issued a legally meaningless pardon to Peters in December, since she was convicted on state charges. The federal government has no authority over her case. Quote, she got a sentence that was harsh. It was a unquote, Polis said in an interview last week. Quote, so we always look at people's sentences, and when you have people that are elderly, we are looking at this across a number of many people in their 70s or 80s in our system. How much of a threat to society are they, and how do we balance that in a way that makes sure they can spend their last few years at home? Unquote. Polis previously indicated he would not give into Trump's pressure campaign and pardon Peters. Griswold told Democracy Docket that she was surprised by Polis' recent comments that he was considering a pardon, and believes if the governor pardoned or commuted Peters' sentence, it would send the wrong message. Quote, we are continuing to see a very intense threat atmosphere for elections, unquote. Griswold said, quote, Donald Trump obviously is trying to make it worse when he issued his illegal fake pardon. We saw far-right figures calling for battle if Tina wasn't released, suggesting that the military should free her. So I think anything that shows that people who would threaten election officials or our election infrastructure make it off without any type of accountability. It just emboldens the people who would want to attack our elections and our democracy. Unquote. In 2021, Peters, then the Mesa County clerk, allowed unauthorized individuals to access sensitive voting machine software during a 2021 update, helped copy and circulate confidential election data, and then misled investigators as the scheme unraveled. The data later appeared in fringe far-right conspiracy circles promoting Trump's big lie that the 2020 election was stolen away from him. Griswold, ladies and gentlemen, first launched an investigation into the Mesa County election office when QAnon conspiracy theorist Watkins posted screenshots and videos of a Mesa County voting machine. Peters was later found guilty of 3 felony counts of attempting to influence a public servant, 1 felony count of conspiracy to commit criminal impersonation, and a slew of misdemeanors. Peters was sentenced to a state prison by Colorado District Judge Matthew Barrett, who did not mince words during the sentence hearing. Quote, "You are no hero. You abused your position and your charlatan who used is still your prior position in office to peddle a snake oil that's been proven to be junk time and time again," unquote, Judge Barrett said. Peters' lawyers appeared in a state appeals court Wednesday to get her conviction overturned. Her attorneys argued that the president can pardon people on state crimes if they were carrying out federal duties, like preserving records for a federal election. Since Trump's return to office, Peters has become a cause célèbre of, ladies and gentlemen, among conspiracy-driven far-right activists, theorists, activists and election deniers, some of whom have called for violence to free her. Griswold worries that a pardon for Peters would not only encourage conspiracy theorists and election deniers, but also Trump, who has punished Colorado over Peters by vetoing key bills and withholding federal funding. Quote, "Allowing a president to act lawless leads to more actions of lawlessness," unquote, Griswold said. Quote, "Allowing a vengeful president to succeed in his vengeance encourages more vengeance. So I ultimately do not believe that the state of Colorado should give in to the demands of President Trump, and we need to stay firm, uphold our laws and our democracy," unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, that right there is going to do it for our legal breaking reporting video analysis update. If you did enjoy this legal breaking reporting video analysis update for the evening, the first of many for the evening of Thursday, January 15, 2026. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, as well as enjoy for more legal breaking news that you need to know about and more on the side of politics. And I will look forward to talking to you guys in the next legal breaking reporting or legal breaking reportings and video analysis update or video analysis updates.